All right, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us for this breakout session, Transitioning from Airline RFPs to Dynamic Performance Management. My name is Michael Baker. I am the Senior Transportation Editor for the BTN Group, and I'll be moderating this session. We have a great panel lined up for this topic. Just a reminder before we begin that we will be using the Q&A feature for this session, so we encourage you to ask questions, but please remember when you ask a question to do it with the Q&A tab. Not the general chat tab. We won't be monitoring that during the session. Also, a reminder to please fill out your feedback survey after this session. You can either do that via the survey icon, or if you wait, you'll be automatically directed to the survey after this session. So clearly, the COVID-19 pandemic has forced many of us to reevaluate our approach to airline sourcing, with travel volumes and airline networks both facing an unknown future. I'm sure, hopefully, all of you heard Arnie Sorensen this morning talk about that from the hotel side. The airline side, of course, is not much different. So for now, from what we're hearing from buyers and airlines both, is that most of this extending contracts at this point are not going to RFP. But even before the pandemic, some buyers were already looking at alternative sourcing methods to the RFP process. We'll be hearing from one of those buyers, Minister Director of Global Travel Management, Mauro Ruggiero, in just a moment. Also want to welcome the rest of my panel. We have Joe Lloyd, who's a partner with Pina & Pinta, Edvito Principal and Vice President of the Air Division, Olivier Benoit, and Mike Bowman, Director of Corporate Sales and Development for Delta Airlines. We're going to do a short Q&A with each of the panelists, and then we're going to open it to general discussion with everyone and take your questions as well. So let's begin with Joe. Joe, why don't you start out just telling us, from your perspective, what does this pandemic mean for the airline RFP in terms of how it's used? Are you seeing anyone even using the RFP at this point in time?
So, hi, Michael, thanks for having me. In regard to the RFP process, well, I think it's likely to be very different, that's for sure. But things are still up in the air at the moment, so pardon the pun. I'm not really sure where we're going to settle yet. We have been doing some contract negotiations because there are some negotiations that need to take place. There are contracts expiring. And, you know, when we look at the disruption and the impact of COVID-19 on the travel industry and in aviation, it's been absolutely devastating. And when we look at how things are likely to recover, I think the general consensus is it's going to take 4 years to get back to 2019 levels. I think that was the latest projection from McKinsey, but I think they've revised it about 4 times. So all of that kind of indicates that none of us really know. And that does kind of lend itself to transitioning to a much more dynamic approach when it comes to airline contract management. So instead of a big global RFP, etc., it does feel more conducive to approach this in a more fluid way. So what does that mean? It means more active contract management for the corporate contracts. And, you know, one of the things that I would suggest that buyers start to do now within their program is to engage with their internal stakeholders. Most of them are doing that already, and see what this means in relation to their return to travel, the routes that they think are going to be coming back, and what that comeback is likely to look like, really from a best guess scenario. So, you know, the problem with this is that historically airlines have used historical data to project what the spend is likely to be. And in fact, some of them are still doing that now. But the problem with that is that we're really sort of basing it on a market that just simply doesn't exist anymore. So it might be time to start taking a more fluid approach to this and looking more at the projected spend rather than the historical data. But that does put a different slant on the relationship between the corporation and the airline.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, and let's talk specifically about some of the challenges that are going to be faced on the air side, because some of the things we're going to be seeing, obviously, pricing is going to be volatile. We're going to see airlines have said to expect smaller networks, so we're going to see fewer routes, and there are going to be some routes that are no longer competitive that were once competitive routes. So is that some of the things you're talking about with your about historical data will not be as useful in looking forward?
Well, that's one of the aspects, but also the travel spend from the corporations isn't going to look like it did previously. Um, I think when it comes to this, most customers aren't traveling internationally right now. So I think that gives us a minute to see what's going to happen with the schedules and the network coverage. But, I think you mentioned it in your intro. It's a very similar landscape to the hotel environment. And so the advice right now is the same. And, I think with airlines and with hotels, it's important to recognize that this is a supply and demand business. And so the pricing will flex accordingly in relation to that. So the best thing to do is to really kind of take a look at an active, ongoing, dynamic program that allows you to ride the wave of the market and the curve of the pricing. A couple of tips in relation to this would be to make sure that your discounts are negotiated in the right classes for utilization, and also to keep an eye on capacity, because to your point about the smaller networks, certain routes may not have the same capacity that they had previously, even within the same period. So just keep an eye on that and make sure that you're approaching it in an ongoing way, because this changes on a weekly basis.
Mm-hmm. And in a long term, is this going to make changes that are permanent, even if and hopefully when we do see things return to normal levels as far as travel volumes and capacity? Is this an opportunity to make some permanent changes in the way that we look at airline sourcing, even when we're back into normal times again?
Well, I hope so, would be my answer to that. For us, we've been working on the dynamic aspect of airline sourcing for a couple of years now. So, we feel very strongly that this is the direction it should have been taking anyway. I think travel will return. I'm very positive about that. It may take longer than a lot of us would like, but I think it definitely will come back. And, I think when we find new ways of working, history shows us that we rarely go back to the old ways. So I think, as we navigate our way through this and start working together in a more dynamic fashion, that is something that, I project, and none of us really know, but I project is likely to stay.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Joe. We'll have some more questions for you in just a moment, but for now, I'd like to move on to Mauro. I know Mauro was having some connectivity issues, but I believe we do have him by phone. We have you, don't we, Mauro?
Yes. Hello. You got me on the phone.
All right. Great. Just wanted to make sure. All right. So we talked kind of long before this crisis. You had already made a decision that you were through with airline RFPs. So tell us a little bit about what led to that decision and what your strategy was from that point.
Sure. It was really twofold. Quite frankly, the airlines nor me as a corporate travel manager want to spend the time. It takes a lot of bandwidth to go through an RFP. And I really did not feel that the end result was so far different than kind of having more of a dynamic approach to it. So those are kind of the reasons why we probably for the past 18 months have been trying to move away from just that normal process of an RFP.
Mm-hmm. And kind of what was how did you approach airlines, and what was their response when you made this decision? Were they willing to buy into this?
Well, yeah, the response was really good from the airline's perspective. And I think, what it's all about is building the relationship, having those touch points very frequently. Even pre-COVID, I mean, your business changes and you need to be able to pivot. To me, a traditional approach inhibits the ability to pivot. And I think that from an airline perspective, my perception was that kind of a win-win, because you were able to more proactively take advantage of new routes, new offerings, and try to see how they matched up with your business internally. Internally, you were able to work with your stakeholders and pick up new kind of volume based on projects that were coming and going. And it wasn't this kind of wait and get behind the curve mentality. We were more, we've been ahead of the curve.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And has the crisis changed your philosophy at all, or is it just kind of reinforced what you were already doing? Is it kind of shown that you were on the right path to begin with to deal with things like this as they happen?
No, it's absolutely reinforced it. And now I'm going to move the same methodology across the board. I'm going to move it to hotels and the other commodities within travel. I think what this, what the pandemic shows us is that, we need to be more agile as an industry. And I think, a lot of us got caught kind of on the heels of our feet. And even more so than ever, I believe dynamic is a better way to kind of approach this.
All right, great. Thanks, Mauro. We'll have some more questions for you in just a moment. All right, for now we're going to move on to Olivier. So, Olivier, why don't you explain to us what dynamic program management is from your perspective? What does that entail, and what value does that offer to travel buyers?
Hi, Michael. Well, I think it has been pretty well already explained by Mauro. So dynamic means ongoing, agile. So the dynamic approach means that you will, as a corporate buyer or travel manager, you will constantly adjust the program to the evolution of the industry and to the evolution of your travel footprint, but also to the evolution of the culture of your company. We can think, for example, about travelers moving to online tools, video conferencing. So there are also not only travel footprint, but culture aspects to factor in. So taking into account this evolution of culture, traveler behavior, and of course industry on an ongoing basis. So what does it mean ongoing? It's, let's say, monthly. So on a monthly basis, you will assess where you are in terms of performance, needs, market conditions, and you will really focus on what matters and you will address it. So it's a very agile process, it's a proactive process, and it brings not only savings and cost avoidance, because when you're building your program in a traditional RFP, that's your top priorities, to get savings and added value items. So it gives more than that. It's also a way to increase traveler satisfaction. And if I want to be a bit more specific, the dynamic approach is based on 4 components. Business intelligence is absolutely key, critical. As usual, if you want to be agile and dynamic, you need to run fresh data. So there is a need to have a pretty strong, solid business intelligence process and tools implemented to consolidate data on a monthly basis, to be able to know where you are with your main KPIs, your performance, identify risk and opportunities that will allow you to target exactly what needs to be done on a monthly basis. Maybe next month there is very little things to address, but maybe the following months there will be a lot of actions that will have to be taken. Actions, and that's the 3 other components: with stakeholders within your company, within your organization, your management, your team, your regional, your local teams, but also, of course, with suppliers. That's the key, negotiating with suppliers, airlines, and relationship building, to Mauro's point, is absolutely critical in that matter, engaging suppliers. And the 4th element is engaging travelers, to educate, to guide them, to influence their behavior. And today, with the pandemic, we can think about all the work that is done to educate travelers on biosafety measures, how to travel safe for the few who are still traveling, and more importantly, how to do that when the travel will ramp up, hopefully soon.
Yes, hopefully very soon. Yes. So, Olivier, Joe mentioned the difficulty in relying on historical data at this point. What value, Vinny, do you see for historical data at this point? What use is it going to be moving forward?
Well, that's a very good point. So data for 2020 is irrelevant. It's good to have, but you cannot action it. So 2019 data has still value. It's a baseline. So use 2019 as a baseline, and then you will forecast, you will build simple tools, what if scenario tools based on 2019. What do you expect your future travel footprint will be at the end of 20 and for 21? You need data when you engage suppliers and also when you engage your stakeholders to build your business cases. So 2019 data is a good baseline. There is a need to factor in to reduce based on what you plan. Are you going to travel first domestic? That's what we can see today. International will resume. Is it going to be Q4 or only early next year? So there is a value in using this data to forecast.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Olivier. All right, we have some great questions coming in. We're going to get to those in just a moment. A reminder, please submit questions via the Q&A tab if you have any. But before we get to that, we're going to hear from Mike. So thanks for joining us. Mike, what are you hearing from buyers in terms of RFPs right now? I'm guessing most people are looking just to extend contracts at this point, as we mentioned, difficulty doing RFPs. But even before the crisis, were you seeing any interest in these sorts of dynamic programs and looking to alternatives to RFPs?
Thanks, Michael. And first of all, thanks for having me. It's a great excuse to get out of my pajamas and put on a suit. So I'm happy for that. So as to your question, it's been a little bit of a mixed bag, and we've been trying to be flexible just as there's a lot of uncertainty in the marketplace right now. There's some of our corporate partners are looking for savings, and it's a tough time right now, so they're looking to do an RFP and simplify their program. And others, and I would say probably the majority, are looking to extend or renegotiate with very minor changes. And the reason for that is that there's just so much uncertainty, and they don't know what the travel environment is going to be like over the next 2 weeks, let alone 2 years. So what we saw, I would say, in the month of April and late March, when this first hit, is we had a lot of negotiations and RFPs that were maybe on the 5-yard line, and we quickly closed those out, and all of the rest were basically extended. After a period of time, I would say it was a little hit or miss over the summer as to whether or not our accounts wanted to negotiate with us or extend. And of course, we're willing to do either at this point. But what's interesting now that we're seeing is a lot of those accounts that extended, that was 6 months ago. And a lot of those were extended for 6 months. So we're actually coming up on a period of time that's quite busy, paradoxically, right now, because of all the normal negotiations. Of course, we have thousands of agreements, and all of the accounts back in March that were extended by 6 months.
Absolutely, and I know Delta had done a lot of work prior to the crisis. You've been doing a lot of work to simplify the process. I know there had been some work to kind of make the legal components of it kind of more of a standard thing and some things like that. Has that served well in doing this more evergreen approach to have the work that you've been doing in that regard?
Well, absolutely. I mean, I think, in any complex process like an RFP, as much as you can simplify, that's going to be better for everyone involved, us included. And, COVID or not, I think that was an area that we were certainly going down. I know, some might bristle at that because the era of global contracting that has proliferated over the last, decade or so, in some ways has made corporate contracting more complex. You're dealing with international partners and whatnot, but in a lot of ways, it's made it simpler. consolidating everything into one agreement and reducing seams between our partners, which is certainly some path that we've been on, COVID or no COVID.
Okay, great. Thanks so much, Mike. We're going to move into the Q&A session, and actually, the first question is I think perfect for you. We have someone who wanted to know about staffing levels at airlines. Obviously, we're hearing a lot of news about unfortunate decisions that are having to be made in terms of furloughs and staff reductions. But what does that mean for the sales process? Is there currently staffing levels in place that can, as you said, it's a very busy time right now. Is that making it more overwhelming, current staffing levels?
No, not at all. And that's something that, although there's a lot in the news and there's a lot about voluntary packages, which certainly at Delta we had a fair amount of that, but we feel very confident that we're well positioned. We've designed our organization customer first to make sure that we're still meeting the needs of the customer. And as you think about these RFP alternatives that we were talking about, and this is something that was it was touched on briefly by Olivier and some of the others, but what we're seeing is RFP takes a lot of time and effort. And, it's really a snapshot in time. It's drawing a line in the sand and talking about performance with that time period in mind. We all know right now that's fairly irrelevant. I think others have touched on that. So whether or not you do away with the RFP or not, there's a hybrid approach makes a lot of sense. We can't set it and forget it for 2 years. I think everybody understands that. So we're very willing to work with our corporate partners to design the right program that meets their needs. Flexibility is key. We understand that. And I think that's been kind of our motto during this whole pandemic crisis. And I don't think you're going to see any of that change going forward. I think we feel very comfortable with the staffing levels that we have.
Okay, great. Thanks, Mike. And Olivier, continue on the thought of staffing levels. It's not just the airlines, but also the TMCs might be dealing with the lower staffing levels right now. So does that present an additional challenge when looking at negotiations?
Well, I can answer from a consultancy perspective. No, there is no challenge. If there is a need to action, if a client is engaging us for good reasons, because there is an urgency to address in the program, we have enough staff and we can call back staff on demand on very short notice. So there is no staffing challenge. The challenge is more about spending time on relevant topics. So that's really the key. There is such a high level of volatility and uncertainty that we have to be honest and look at, answer the question, is it the right time to renegotiate a deal or to spend time to try to fine tune an agreement? Or it could be, but maybe it's also wise maybe to wait for a couple of more weeks. So we have a better understanding on the travel footprint of the corporation, the needs, as well on the airline schedule, which is changing on a weekly basis, on the joint venture structures. Some airlines are grounded, some airlines are merging, some airlines are changing alliance. So there will be a lot of things happening. And the critical point is really to step in at the right time. So between now and the end of the year.
All right, thanks, Olivier. And jumping off of your point about footprint, we have a question here, and I think I'll start with Joe on this one. There's a lot of companies that says that they're kind of using this as an opportunity to become more sustainable by traveling less after COVID. So what would the advice be if a company is now looking to travel only 60% of what it used to be, is the number given in the question? So how does that change the approach, if at all?
Well, it doesn't necessarily change the approach to how you would source the air program in a dynamic way, but it does does alter the approach to how you manage your overall travel program, and look at what the spend levels are likely to be, what the behaviors are likely to be, and it will change some of that data and some of those historical patterns and perhaps some of your key routes. So, a case in point is we have a customer at the moment where they've very much taken that approach, and they have said that moving forward, they won't be doing any meetings for the next year that are internal meetings face-to-face. That's the kind of thing that we would look at in relation to the air sourcing program. It's really just about the frequency of how people are going to be traveling, where they're going to be traveling, and really building a program around what their future plans are going to look like.
All right, thanks, Joe. And Mauro, from your own perspective, do you expect, emerging out of this, that your travel levels are going to be close to what they were, or do you think that there could be kind of a permanent reduction in place? Sorry, Mauro, do we still have you? All right, we'll come back to that.
I'm sorry about that. So no, there'll definitely be a permanent reduction in travel spend. We were already trending down prior to COVID, as we were trying to move more people towards virtual collaboration and trying to already go down the route of not having to travel or travel smarter. And that was kind of our program we were running with. So I just think that COVID has just accelerated for us kind of the end game of our program, which was to look at about a 30% travel reduction, 25 to 30% roughly.
Okay, thanks. And Mauro, we're going to stay with you for this next question. Someone asked, they want to have some perspective about the adequate frequency to make adjustments to program. This particular person asking the question says they've been doing a dynamic program for the last 5 years, but they're curious and wondering if maybe they're over adjusting. So what do you think is adequate, and can there be going back to the table too much?
Well, I try to do a quarterly checkpoint with the carriers, but if I see that there's a major project coming down the pipe, or there's some sort of a new route that's coming online, then I'll accelerate that. So I kind of will keep my finger on the pulse, but I aim for quarterly.
Okay, great, thanks. And Olivia, any thoughts on frequency?
Yeah, I mean, I can just agree with Mauro. There is a need for the main suppliers, the main partners. Anyway, there is a need to keep the contact, let's say, on a quarterly basis, and then it will be just depending on the requirements, on your needs, on your forecast. You may negotiate, you may adjust a contract once a year with a particular carrier, but for a very large legacy carrier, let's name Delta, for example, that would be a large spend in your program. You may have monthly discussions. You constantly have adjustments, optimization opportunities because of schedule change, pricing policy changes, travel footprint changes.
Okay, thanks, Olivier. All right, the next question, I think we might start with Mike on this one. Someone wants to know that obviously we're seeing more frequent schedule changes now with airlines, and sometimes on shorter terms. So they want to know, how does the need for data change to ensure that the market share is met, or is the preference now to go, it's better just to go to a straight contract value? So kind of what does market share mean going forward as we're kind of dealing with a lot more frequent changes?
Yeah, sure. Market share is obviously important. That's a key metric that we use. There are other metrics, and certainly in the COVID environment, that might not be the right metric for 2020. That's not to say that it's not the right metric going forward, but I think we touched on earlier, 2019 historical data is largely what we use to model. 2020 data is all over the place. Certainly with all the schedule changes, the very, very low volume of actual travel, the numbers can be a little bit all over the place. So I wouldn't put too much stock into what's happening right now on a market share basis. But as to the question, we're looking at the total value, and it's completely custom in every deal. And market share could be a major component in some market. It could be something else in another. So it's really a holistic discussion, and that's where we have the relationship and the partnership to be able to understand what's important for both parties.
Okay, great. Thanks, Mike. We have a question here asking particularly about ancillary fees, and I think it's an interesting discussion, especially as we saw in the last few weeks. There's been a move away with all three of the big three U.S. carriers, as well as Alaska, have all decided that they're going to permanently get rid of change fees, at least for domestic, or it kind of depends on airline to airline. American's doing, I think, some short haul international as well, but. I think, Olivia, maybe we'll start with you. Is kind of how do ancillaries fit into this approach, and what do you think it's going to look like going forward? Or do you think we're going to see fewer ancillary fees? Is that going to be a smaller part of the discussion going forward? Is this going to be a trend?
Yeah, if we look at the trend, the ancillary will be a larger part of the discussion. It has been a very growing share of the airline revenue globally. Especially for low-cost carriers, and not more recently, because now I think legacy carriers have done a great job to offer additional services and monetize it. So ancillary is still definitely an important point of discussion that is addressed during the dynamic management of the contract. You talk not only about the fare basis, the discounts applicable to a fare basis, but you also look at added value items, cost avoidance. So there is also a need to address the ancillary. What will also change is the implementation of the new air retailing model with bundle offers, personalized offers that airlines are working on and are starting to push in the market. So that's also a big part of the discussion in the coming months and years with airlines.
That's right. That was our big discussion for a while, and it kind of got pushed aside with the recent news events. But there's still work going on within airlines on these things, because we're talking about NDC and that sort of the ability to push out bundles and things like that. That work is still going on. So that's still part of the discussion. Joe, what are your thoughts on this same topic about how to work in ancillaries and such in these discussions? Hi, Joe. Do we still have you? All right. Well, we'll move on for now. Hopefully, we'll get Joe back in a moment. Mike, you kind of addressed this, but we have just the direct question, so I'll just propose it to you. Someone wants to know. It says, "What's important? What's the most important for an airline? Contract value or market share?"
Again, when we look at the overall partnership, it's very custom. I can't give you a one size fits all answer for each account. Many of our deals, most of our deals, actually just about all, have a market share component, and that's a key metric for us. When we talk about the value, value can mean many different things. We touched on ancillary fees that sometimes aren't always adequately addressed. We talked about the different products, cabins, booking classes, markets. So it's really a custom approach. And what I want to talk about, and because I've seen a number of the questions come through on, if we take this dynamic approach, how do we account for all of those variables? I think what we've seen, at least, and maybe Mauro has a different opinion on this, but what we've seen is we take our traditional process, let's say, to set that baseline, and then you're continuously adjusting off the baseline. So it's not like you're continuously adjusting every single variable at once on a monthly basis. Obviously, that's a lot of work to undergo. But once you've got that good solid baseline set, the ability to go dynamic is very helpful, because then if you have new markets that pop up, then we can make sure that there is coverage for those new markets. If you are flying new products, if your policy changes, we can address that. If there's any kind of mix change or ancillaries or whatever it is that is changing from what was originally contemplated, that can be adjusted on the go.
All right, great. Thanks, Mike. Joe, I think we have you back now.
I'm not sure. Do you? I hope so. Can you hear me?
Yes, I hear you. Welcome. All right. So I wanted to throw this question at you. Let's talk about kind of what technology availability now that's allowing some of these changes. And of course, in the description of the session, we talked about blockchain and some other things. What are some of the enabling technologies that are going to allow for this more dynamic approach to airline program management?
Okay, so I missed the last couple of questions. So if I start going off piste, Michael, just pull me back in. So I think what Olivier said earlier about, the 2019 data being a baseline, it's a really good baseline for understanding your origins, your destinations, your travel patterns for sure. Moving forward, I think one of the more important things is going to be to make sure that we can predict as much as possible is taking the data as you are returning to business and also engaging with your internal stakeholders and using your predictive analytics as much as you possibly can to figure out what travel is going to look like. However, one of the beauties about doing things in a dynamic way is you're not setting the stone for the next 2 years. So as your patterns move and flex, you can move and flex your program. So if you see routes that are coming back that you hadn't anticipated, as Mike just talked about, that's something that you can easily bring into your program. But what you need to be doing in order to manage a program in a dynamic way is, first of all, transition your program to dynamic so you've got that baseline set. And then you work with it on a regular basis. So whether, depending on the size of your program, if it's a monthly basis, if it's a smaller program, maybe you do it on a quarterly basis so you can start to identify trends and patterns. And as you see those trends and patterns, you then engage your and you look to bring the new routes in, or you adjust on the existing routes. So it's really ongoing management. That's the thing about a dynamic program, is you don't sign it and shelve it. You work with it on a regular basis. That works for everyone concerned, because for the travel buyers, their airline partners are constantly engaged, and the airline partners know that this is a contract that's working for them because it's a living, breathing thing that's modified on a regular basis.
Okay, thanks so much, Joe. All right. I think, Maura, I'm going to throw this question to you. We have a question. They kind of want to know a little bit more about the approach to this. So does this start out with negotiating like system-wide discounts, and then you dynamically add top markets and new markets? Or kind of, so how did your approach, what was your approach with this?
Sure. So I agree with, first of all, let me say I agree both with Mike and Joe that you do need to start with a baseline because, as with anything good, a foundation is important. So we started with what we deemed to be a solid foundation, using our kind of anchor city pairs where we knew, the business was really not going to change because it's in between our headquarters and key COE locations and whatnot. From there, everything else, quite frankly, is kind of, again, like Joe said, it's a living document. So it's all free game. A lot of the kind of conversations with the carriers were driven by conversations with functional business leads as they're talking about new signings, new projects, new consultancy work. And so those conversations led to kind of needs that we saw coming down the pipeline. And those are the conversations that I had with the carriers. Now, the one difference that I'm doing here with, trying to look at post-COVID is we're trying to expect what's going to come, or what would the baseline be in the future once travel gets back up to speed. Is I'm actually using the last 12 months of, let's call it, regular business as my baseline. and then I'm going to go off of that based on where I think we will see our decreases in travel. So I'm not looking at my 2019, but I'm looking at the last 12 rolling months. But again, it's a combination of using the data that we've had and using the needs that we see coming down the pipe and kind of working that in with the conversations with the carriers.
All right, great. Thanks, Mauro. All right, next question. I think I'm going to pose this to Olivier, and it's how do, obviously one of the big challenges going forward is going to be dealing with the large number of vouchers and such that are left over. So that's obviously going to be a short-term problem, but we're obviously going to see a lot of changes, I think, in the short term too. So does that change the approach at all? The fact that that's something we're going to be dealing with, at least in the short term.
So no, it does not change this approach. I mean, to go dynamic, this very large set of unused tickets vouchers, actually, for most of the corporation, it has already been managed. It's not a done deal, but it was a key focus. A lot of work has been done over the past few months around this, because we are talking about hundreds of millions globally. So this is a critical point. It was a lot of work around identifying, really understand what are the unused tickets, and then talking to the suppliers, what can we do about it? You know, what's the next step? How to get the money back? And this is something that is now or will take place. It's difficult to give a general answer because it's more like corporate/supplier specific. There is no really an industry standard on how airlines are managing these unused ticket vouchers. There are some smart processes that have been implemented by a couple of airlines. Some others are still struggling. Some airlines are extremely flexible to go with a cash refund. So it's a topic that has been worked on, and it's an important topic. It's not going to completely change the approach. It's something that needs to be discussed when corporations are engaging suppliers between today and the end of the year.
Okay, great. Thank you. All right, we're almost out of time, and I've been told we have to be very strict adherence to the time. So I'm going to give out one more question we have from the audience, and it's I think maybe I'll give this one to Joe to end with. And someone wants to know just what are the variables that we should be using to predict the future? That's a dangerous question, but any thoughts on that?
Well, you know, I know people call me an old witch, but really, when it comes to predicting the future, I mean, look, I think the best thing that that people can do within their businesses is exactly what Mara just described, is to make sure that you're engaging with your stakeholders internally to try and ascertain as best you can what your travel is going to look like as it comes back. So use your data from 2019 if you don't know who the traveling departments are. Go to your top spenders, get some ideas from them as to what their plans are for next year. Have they all reverted back to a zero-based budgeting aspect, or do they have plans for travel and return to travel? What are they? Where do they think they're going to be going? And I really think that the best predictions at this point are going to come internally as opposed to, you know, historical external data. So that would be my advice, is to engage within your own businesses and try and figure out as best you can what the return to business is going to look like.
All right, thanks so much, Joe. And we would never call you a witch by any stretch of the imagination. So thank you so much. So unfortunately, that's all the time we have for today. Once again, I'd like to give a huge thanks to our panel. Thank you, Joe. Thank you, Marco. Thank you, Mike. And thank you, Olivier. Also, a quick reminder, please fill out your feedback survey. It will be popping up just as soon as my face disappears here. And right now, after that, please join us either in the lounge or take a tour of the exhibit halls. Thank you all so much. Have a great rest of the show.
Thank you.